Well, hey kids, Mr. Brett here, and I am really excited about today's story. You think I'm joking? I'm not joking. I really am excited. So excited that I might just explode! Okay, not really, but I am really excited. But before we get into today's story, I want to remind us of where we've been. We've looked at a lot of things these past few weeks. We've looked at the creation and the fall and how God created man and that He walked with man in the garden, and then man and woman sinned against Him by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And all throughout that story, God is preparing something. He is moving towards something. You know, in Genesis chapter 3, God tells the serpent that, you know what, serpent? You may strike his heel, but he is going to crush your head. That's a kind of crazy verse. But you know what it was talking about? It was talking about that one day that there was going to be somebody who was coming that would crush the head of Satan. And you and I know that person as Jesus Christ. That's right, and that's who this story is all about. But after the creation and after the fall, there was still Adam and Eve. And you remember they had two kids named Cain and Abel, but they also had another son named Seth. And you see, Seth, he had a kid who 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 had a guy named Noah. And that's who we're going to talk about today, is Noah. And you know what? This was a time in the story of God where the world had just gone crazy. I mean, people were just doing insane stuff and wicked stuff against God, the one who had created them. And here is where we pick up our story. Because the Bible says, you remember this? This is where we get these stories from. And the Bible says that there was so much wickedness on the earth that God regretted even making man at all. Can you believe that? Have you ever done something that you regretted? You know, maybe it's something that you thought, well, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. I really wish I wouldn't have gone there. Well, God had the same feeling. He wished that He had never created man, because He looked down and He saw man was doing all these crazy bad things. But God saw one man that the Bible says was blameless. One man that He saw was righteous. And you know who that was? It was Noah. And so God decided that He was going to destroy the earth, but He was going to save Noah. Man, wouldn't you like to have that title? Wouldn't you like God to look down on you and say, hey, look at that person. Look at that kid. They're blameless. They're righteous. Have you ever had to make some tough decisions to not go with the flow of what everybody else is doing? Maybe you've been in a crowd and people are making fun of another kid. And you have to stand there and you have to make the decision, you know what? I can either join in and make fun of this person, or I can do the right thing and not make fun of this person. Or maybe a bunch of kids have decided that they're going to go and do something that they shouldn't be doing. And you make the decision to say, you know what? God wouldn't want me to do that, and so I'm not going to do it. Well, that's how Noah was. Noah said, you know what? I'm going to live for God no matter what. And God saw that, and He chose to save him. But not so much for everybody else, because God sent this big flood. Now listen to what the Bible says. It comes from Genesis chapter 6. It says that God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. And so you know what God told Noah to do? God told Noah to build an ark. Now, why would you tell somebody to build an ark? Well, the only reason I can think of is because it's going to start raining. That's right. The floods are coming. And so God says, look, Noah, I'm about to flood the whole earth, and I want you to build an ark. And he gives them all the dimensions. He says, it needs to be this long, and you need to use this kind of wood. And so Noah starts building the ark, him and his family. And can you imagine, like walking down the street and seeing like one of your neighbors, like building this big boat? I mean, how crazy would that be? Well, it was the same thing back then. People were making fun of Noah and his family for making this big, huge ark. They're like, hey, Noah, what's the boat for? Ha, ha, ha. And they keep making fun of him this whole time that he's making the ark. And Noah just keeps on, just keeps building and building like God told him to. And God tells Noah that he can take his family with him. So he can take his wife, and he can take his sons, and he can take his sons' wives. But they are the only people that can get on the ark. Aside from the animals, of course. See, God said, Noah, I want you to take how many of each animal? Can anybody guess? How many people think 2 of each animal, male and female? Well, you're partly right. The Bible says that God told Noah to take 2 of every unclean animal, but to take 7 of every clean animal. So, you had 7 of the clean animals, and then you had 2 of every unclean animal, male and female. And then God said that he was going to send rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Can you imagine it raining for 40 days and 40 nights? I mean, it's like, whoa, whoa, here comes the rain. Whoa, it's not stopped raining. Whoa, 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 whoa. So Noah and his family, they get on the ark. And the Bible says that Noah is 600 years old. Can you imagine a 600-year-old man getting on the ark with his family? I mean, that's just wild. And the Bible says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And then finally the waters started to recede. And then the Bible says that Noah opened up a window that he had made on the ark. He sent out a raven and a dove. And he sent out the dove to see if there was dry land that they could get out and walk on. And the dove just flew around and ended up flying back to Noah. And he knew that he had to wait a little longer. So he waited 7 more days. And then after 7 days, he sent the dove out again. And this time, the dove came back. But when he came back, he had an olive leaf in his beak. And that is how Noah knew that, okay, there's live vegetation out there. We can get out now. And so him and his family were able to finally get off of the ark. And then, you know what God did? The Bible says that he made a covenant with Noah. A covenant is just kind of like an agreement or a contract. And he said it made a covenant with Noah by placing a rainbow in the clouds. He made a covenant that he would never destroy the earth again by a flood. And so, what are some of the lessons that we learned from the story of Noah? Well, one lesson is that God has a plan. I want everybody to say that with me. On the count of 3, say, God has a plan. 1, 2, 3. All right. That's right. God has a plan. You know what? God has a plan for your life too. He does. Just like he had a plan for Noah's life. And Noah, who was a righteous man and did what God said, God had a plan for his life. And God has a plan for your life. Isn't that cool? That God's got a plan for your life and for my life? Man, I think that's awesome. What is God's plan for your life? Well, you're special to him. And he made you for a purpose. So, be excited about what God's going to do with your life. Because I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what you're going to be. but God does, and He has a plan. Until next time,